Well, welcome to our Wednesday night, I don't know what we're calling this, in-home Bible study, Words with Friends.
Sure.
We know that it's cold outside and we don't want you driving out on these slick, icy roads. And so we're asking the question to start tonight, what's the coldest you've ever been in your entire life? You can pause and answer as a family, or you can just listen to our answers. And we'll start with Leah. What's the coldest you've ever been?
So there are a couple of options, but I think for me, when we would go to Camp Goddard as a child camp, this was our church camp, and we would always go to this creek called Little Niagara, and it was called Little Niagara because it was literally freezing. And we would swim because that's what you do as a child. You swim in freezing cold waters. And I remember looking down and my legs were turning blue.
Oh.
So that's when I got out and stopped swimming. So that was super fun.
We were in Minnesota. We went up during the wintertime. We had to go up for a funeral, or else I think we would have gone because it was in the negatives. And so I don't even know what the wind chill was, but I remember my brother-in-law saying, "Jeff, take a big deep breath through your nose." And I did, and he goes, "That's all your sinuses dying." Like, it was so cold, it just froze up. What about you, Luke? Coldest you've ever been?
I think it was in 6th grade. We went on a ski trip to Wolf Creek, Colorado. And it was the first time I'd ever seen snow or interacted with snow at all. And I was skiing, and I fell off of a jump or something, and the snow got into my gloves.
Oh, no.
And I rushed down to the lodge and immediately stuck my hands in warm water. And I felt like they were going to fall off because there was just that numbing pain.
We all know that. Like, immediately when you said that, we were trying to explain to the boys when it snowed a couple weeks ago, like, it's all about the gloves. Because once you get cold hands,
it's over.
You're done.
Or feet.
Yeah, or wet.
Or socks.
Anything wet out there.
Yeah.
So it's one of my favorite stories, and I've used it in articles and sermons, but it's actually from a friend of mine, a guy by the name of Chris Altrock, and he writes about the Great Alaskan Highway. Do you guys remember this story? I'll read it to you and we'll see if you remember. In 1942, the U.S. government decided to carve a road from Dawson Creek, British Columbia, to Big Delta, Alaska. That's 1,422 miles of road, right through the Canadian Rockies, through the Yukon Territory, and into remote Alaska. This is how they recruited workers. Men hired for this job will be required to work and live under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Temperatures will range, get this, from 90 degrees above zero to 70 degrees below zero. And in Texas, that all happens in one day. Men will have to fight swamps, rivers, ice and cold, mosquitoes, flies, and gnats will not only be annoying, but will cause bodily harm. If you are not prepared to work under these and similar conditions, do not apply. Now, why did they build this road? Because the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1942, and there was kind of or 1941, and there was this scare that we'd be invaded through Alaska. And so they needed a way to move troops and soldiers. And so this was actually built, some by hired workers and by 16,000 soldiers. It was an amazing effort. It cost, get this, $138 million. It was the most expensive construction project of the entire war.
Wow.
And here was the team. Are you ready? 174 steam shovels, and we've got a picture that you're going to show. It's going to go up. Watch. There it is. 364 blade graders, 904 tractors, 5,000 trucks, bulldozers, snowplows, cranes, and generators. Conditions were miserable. This is my favorite one. One often repeated tale concerned a staff sergeant who arrived at Dawson Creek during a blizzard, and he asked his superior officer, "Major, where do I sleep?" And the grinning major said, "Take any snowdrift you like, but this one is mine." In the winter, pickaxes bent across the frozen ground. Any vehicle that got wet from a still flowing stream had to keep moving because the water on it would freeze and snap the axle in two. That's cold, folks. In the spring, rivers flooded and equipment and men were trapped in thick mud. That's actually the picture that we're going to show you. Those familiar with the project claimed it was the most difficult construction project undertaken since the building of the Panama Canal. And in the end, they were successful. You can see some beautiful pictures of this highway through a beautiful part of our country and Canada. But here's the whole reason why I tell that story. One, because it's cold. And two, because God tends to make a way through the most impossible circumstances. And I love the idea of this road that went up through mountains and went through swamps and went through forests, and yet God makes a way. Mm-hmm. And so the same is true about this covenant. And we're going to watch this video. In fact, some of us have not seen it yet. So we're going to watch it, and then we're going to come right back, and we're going to talk about covenant. And here's the question I want you to keep in your mind while you watch it. What's the biggest promise you've ever made? All right, we'll see you in a minute.
If you've been around Christians, you've probably heard of the idea of having a personal relationship with God, which could mean different things in the Bible, like having God as a friend, or your father, or maybe your teacher.
But there's one particular way that the Bible talks about this relationship that you find all over. But strangely, we don't talk about it that much. And that's the idea of a partnership with God.
A partnership like working alongside someone to accomplish a goal together.
Right, and this is actually what you see at the beginning of the Bible. God creates this good world full of all of this potential. And then God appoints these unique creatures, humans, as his partners in bringing more and more goodness out of all that potential.
But the humans don't want to partner with God. They rebel and try to create a world on their own terms.
And so this broken partnership is the Bible's explanation for why we're stuck in a world of corruption and injustice and the tragedy of death.
It's not like there's just one or two humans who have bailed on this relationship. In the story of the Bible, everyone has abandoned the partnership with God.
So what God does is select a smaller group of people out of the many, and he makes a new partnership with them called a covenant. And in a covenant, God makes promises, and then in exchange asks his partner to fulfill certain commitments. And the purpose of all of this is to somehow use this covenant relationship to renew his partnership with everybody else.
Now, there are actually 4 times in the Old Testament that we're told God initiates a covenant relationship with Noah, Abraham, the nation of Israel, and King David.
And it's through these that God is forming a covenant family into which all people will eventually be invited.
So let's see how these work. The first one is with Noah.
So in this story, God has just brought the flood to cleanse the world of humanity's corruption, and Noah and his family are the only ones left. And so God makes a covenant with Noah, saying, listen, I know that humans will continue to be evil, but despite that, I'm not going to destroy it like this again. Instead, the earth will be this reliable place for us to work together.
Great. So what does Noah have to do?
Nothing. And that's what's so interesting about this first covenant, is that God is promising to be faithful, even though he knows humans won't be.
The next time we see God make a covenant is with a man named Abraham. God chooses him, promises to bless him, give him a large family, lots of land where they can flourish.
And in return, God asks Abraham to trust him and train up his family to do what is right and just. And the whole reason for this covenant is God says that somehow he's going to bring his blessing to all families of the world through this one family.
So that's Abraham. The next time we see God make a covenant is when Abraham's family grows into the tribe of Israel.
And this covenant is with the whole tribe. God asks them to obey a set of laws, which are these guidelines for living well as a community of God's partners. And if they do this, then God promises to bless them and that they will become a people who then represent him to the rest of humanity.
That's the covenant with Israel. The last covenant is with King David.
Yeah, the tribe of Israel has become this large nation ruled by David. And God asked David and his descendants to partner with him by leading Israel in obeying the laws and doing what is right and just. And God promises that one day, one of David's sons will come and extend God's kingdom of peace and blessing over all the nations.
So those are the 4 covenants that God makes in order to restore his partnership with the whole world.
But here's what happens. Israel breaks the covenant. They worship other gods, they allow horrible injustice, and so they lose their land and are forced off into exile.
So it seems hopeless. But during this time, Israel's prophets talked about a day when God would restore these covenants in spite of Israel's failure, somehow.
Yeah, they called it the New Covenant. And this is actually what's so interesting about Jesus, is that he's introduced into this story as the one who fulfills all of these covenant relationships. We're told that he's from the family of Abraham, and so he will bring the blessings of that family to the whole world. We're told that he's the faithful Israelite who is able to truly obey the law. And we're told that he's the king from the line of David, and so he goes about extending God's kingdom of justice and peace to all.
And that's really remarkable for one guy.
Yeah, and what it highlights is perhaps the most surprising claim of all made about this man, that Jesus is no mere human, but rather God become human. And God did this in order to be that faithful covenant partner that we are all made to be, but have failed to be. And so through Jesus, God has opened up a way for anyone to be in a renewed partnership with him.
So Jesus calls people to follow him and become part of this new covenant family.
And despite their failures, Jesus is committed to making them into partners who are becoming more and more faithful.
The story of the Bible ends with a vision of a fully renewed world, full of goodness and peace.
And there's this renewed humanity there, partnering together with God to expand the goodness of his creation. And so the end of the Bible story is really a new beginning.
And we're back. I hope you enjoyed that video. So, real quickly, what's the biggest promise you've ever made?
I mean, I feel like there's no other for me, it's getting married. The vows I said to get married.
Jesus answered.
Yeah, well, I can't think of a bigger promise than that.
I only limited myself to not say that because I thought it was a Jesus answer. But I remember signing all the papers for our house.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember feeling like
Or car.
I'm just like signing my life away.
Yeah.
Even more, like, I remember I took out some loans for college, but I didn't.
You were too young to know what you were doing at that point.
I just said, sure,
Right.
I'll spend.
Give me money.
Right. But I really felt the weight, I should say, I really felt the weight of that decision when I signed the. What about you, Luke?
Just want Christina to know I thought marriage first, but it was already taken. So I was going to go with in preschool, I made a promise to be best friends forever. And so.
Are you?
I don't know.
You don't know
I
if you're
haven't talked
best.
to him in a while, so
You better get on
we'll
that.
figure it out.
I guess it wasn't. Have you kept what?
You know why?
That's
it
a big
didn't-
promise, though.
You know why it didn't work? Because there was no penalty.
That's right.
Oh,
See, in
yeah.
a covenant, the
Yeah.
covenant is different because it says, what? I will do this if you'll do this, and if you don't,
Yeah.
we're going to charge you interest.
That's
Yes.
right.
Or in marriage, you're going to get half my stuff.
You're gonna
there's
pay money for the rest
it's
of your
very
life.
bad. So that was the definition. Covenant is a word that describes a formal relationship between two parties who agree to a set of promises so that they can work together towards a common goal. But I love the idea of the common goal. That's not in a
Yeah.
contract.
No.
That's in a covenant. That we're, like in a marriage, we're working together. There's some churches that ask their members to sign covenants to say that we're all going to work towards this. All right, so let's look at that first one, the Noachic covenant. Luke, read from Genesis 9, and I'm sure it will come up on the screen, what God says to Noah.
Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth.
All right, so what's different in this covenant? They pointed out in the video that there's no other side of this
Right.
one. This is just God saying, I'm never going to do this again. Why do you think it's important? Why it's an important difference, but why is it important that there's no other side to kind of keep up their side of this, not a bargain, but an agreement?
Well, I think Noah and his family were chosen for a reason because they were already upholding what God wanted them to do. They were already fulfilling his part of the promise before it was even made.
Yeah.
So there wasn't any need for it because he was just hoping they would continue that. It was basically him saying, this is why I chose you. You get to do this.
This is more about God than it is about the
Yes.
other side of the who's signing on the dotted line.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's, God shows this ultimate sign of power, right? And I think he doesn't want his creation constantly living in fear of this is going to
Yeah.
happen
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
So he makes that promise and he says, you don't. I'm not a God that is just to be feared, right? And so I want you to have that reassurance that this won't happen.
Now, here's what's interesting. What happens with these covenants is they go from broad to very, very specific. And so we narrow it down. The next covenant we hear about is between Israel, and he says in Exodus 19, you yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. So what's the implication there? That Israel, this nation, is going to be his priests. And how is that different from the Noah covenant about I'm not going to destroy people?
Well, he's asking for something in return.
Okay.
He's asking for a way of life. He's asking for them to change how they're going to live to become that.
Well, you say they're going to change the way they live. That there is a set, he says, if you'll listen to my instructions, and we'll hear it in other places, and don't turn to it from the right or to the left, but do what I say. So now we're defining, we're getting closer and closer. And then he says, but you're going to be my representation. Look, this is kind of a hard question to answer just off the cuff, but what does it mean to be a priest of God? When you read that Israel's going to be a nation of priests, what does that sound like to your ears?
I would think you're the standard, right? You're the one, you're the role model, you're my representation here. And when people look to see, well, who is this God, right? Their closest thing that they can look at is this priest that he's appointed.
We did a whole study in the adults with the adults on Wednesday nights about priesthood, and a priest is simply the person who's the mediator between someone and God.
Right.
So they carry a message. That's a prophet. They're the representative.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and the way Peter tells it, he says, well, I'll let you read this, Leah. This is 1 Peter 2, 9 through 10.
But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy.
Okay, so this is an interesting one because, again, we're kind of narrowing the focus, but then at the same time, he's broadening it as well to say it's not just the people of Israel, but you, if you've accepted Christ, if you've come to Christ, you're part of this holy nation, this royal, that's what I'm saying, right? This holy nation, this royal priesthood. So now you become the representatives, and the implication is that's us following after Jesus. The David covenant, the Davidic covenant, was about somebody being on the throne of David forever and ever and ever and ever, and that person is who?
Jesus.
I'm so glad you said Jesus, Leah. And here's how we know that, because nobody else fills that bill.
Right.
So even if they had kept the kingdom together, even if there had been, his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson still on the throne,
Right.
it would not have filled the description of what the future king was going to be. All right, Luke, one more time. This is Psalm 72. It's a long psalm, so we're only going to read part of it, but this is the description of what it looks like for God's covenant to come true in some person.
Psalm 72. For he will deliver the needy who cry out, the afflicted who have no one to help. He will take pity on the weak and the needy and save the needy from death. He will rescue them from their oppression and violence, for precious is their blood in his sight. Long may he live. May gold from Sheba be given him. May people ever pray for him and bless him all day long. May grain abound throughout the land, and the tops of the hills may it sway. May the crops flourish like Lebanon and thrive from the grass of the field. May his name endure forever. May it continue as long as the sun. Then all the nations will be blessed through him, and they will call him blessed.
So I guess my question would be, what would have to happen for that to become true? Like, what parts of that do you read and go, oh, well, that's true when such and such happens, or we can make that happen by... I always think like if I'm reading the description of Scripture and I hear he's going to rescue them from oppression and violence. Well, there's been times in history where people were rescued.
Right.
Is there still oppression and violence today?
Yes.
Yeah. Have there been times when there's been plenty in the land and people have prospered and grown? And you might, point to America and go, hey, look how prosperous we are. And you go, well, that part's true. But the only person or the only thing that can make all of that true, can tick every box, is Jesus. And so we're kind of looking ahead. That's what this covenant is doing. And then here's how it all comes together. It all comes together in the person of Jesus. And I love how the author of Hebrews, we don't know who wrote Hebrews, by the way. Did you know that? We don't know. But the author of Hebrews, in Hebrews 8 and 9, if you want to go read both of those chapters, they all talk about the high priest. Well, Jesus becomes that high priest. Mm-hmm. So remember, we started out whole world, nation of Israel. We're getting closer. We're looking for this Messiah. And now it all comes true in the person of one historical figure, Jesus Christ. Now listen to this description. But when Christ came as high priest of all the good things that are now already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not made with human hands. That is to say, it's not part of this creation. He did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but he entered the most holy place for all by his own blood, once for all by his own blood, thus obtaining eternal redemption. The blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who are ceremonially unclean sanctify them so that they will be outwardly clean. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God? For this reason, Christ is the mediator of a new covenant, that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, that he has died as a ransom to set them free from the sins committed under the first covenant. All right, we're going to all put on our theologian caps for a minute, and I'm going to ask you guys to identify in that passage elements of a covenant. Where do you see anything that jumps out to you of things that we've talked about before, all the way back from Noah, then to Israel, then to David, and then through Christ? Where do you see elements of a covenant in there?
I think when it talks about he did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but entered the most highly placed.
So the blood of the goats and calves was part of the covenant, right?
Right.
That was part of the instructions of if you do this, then you'll be forgiven.
Right.
Correct.
So that was something that you would have gone, oh yeah, that's my monthly mortgage payment.
Right.
Like, okay, I get that. What else? Mm-hmm. We got the word high priest right at the beginning, right? That should jump out. This idea of being clean, and you didn't see it because we had the passage up on the screen, but when we described that, when we read that, Leah was kind of like, oh, that's disgusting, right?
It's a very vivid picture.
It is. And so we see the element of sacrifice. By the way, that's how covenants were sealed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You would take an animal, divide it in half.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds so nice. Lots of blood. And then you would both walk through.
Lots of blood.
You'd walk through both sides, and you would say, as has happened to this goat, may it happen to me if me and Luke aren't best friends for the rest of our lives.
Yikes.
And so Timmy, or whatever his name was, what's his name?
I forgot.
Oh, you're not very good.
What?
What
It's a long
what
time
else?
ago.
It was a
you're
long
best.
time.
I thought you were talking about the goat.
No, the goat's not named.
Oh,
What was the goat's name?
We didn't even name
Oh
it.
my goodness.
we didn't even name the
We
goat.
didn't want to become attached.
That was probably a good idea.
So what else do you see? Mediator was the other
Yeah.
word. What when you hear mediator, what do you think, Luke?
I think of the guy in between, hearing both sides and trying to come to a compromise, or just the voice of reason.
I thought for sure you were going to say baseball, because every time I hear mediator, I think about contract arbitration.
Oh my goodness.
And
It's probably true.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, and they have the team, and then they have the player, and the player wants more money, and the team wants to not pay them more monay, and then there's
the guy in the middle.
they enter into what's called arbitration,
Right.
and whatever this person in the middle says, they make it all clear. Okay, a couple more things I want to say here is, okay, we've gotten all the way down to Christ, all the way down to his sacrifice, all the way down to the cross. But then here's what's amazing. Then it opens all the way back up to Noah. And he says the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
There's absolutely no one who is left out of this. Isn't that cool? That God makes this huge promise. I'm not going to destroy, but I'm going to save. And he keeps narrowing the focus. And then he opens it back up. And he reverses the destruction of the flood. And we often use that imagery to say it's through the baptism into Jesus, like coming through those flood waters.
Right.
So you might ask this. Let's ask a couple of questions to discuss on our way out tonight. You can discuss this with your family. What kind of commitments do we need to make to each other? What kind of commitments? And families, we often make commitments that are about punishments, so that if you do this, you're not going to get that. I want to encourage you to try to make some commitments about good things, so that if you do this, we'll go and do that.
Yes.
What else do we need to say about covenants? What are some ways in which teens can think about covenants, Luke, that would be helpful?
I think a big picture was the reason God made these covenants was to try to protect his people. And I think as teens, sometimes when we make promises with our parents, we see it as a rule that we have to follow, or like you said, or there's some sort of punishment. But I think what it needs to be, the outlook of it is, well, this is because I'm loved and protected.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. I like that. That there's a reason for these parameters.
Right.
There's a reason
Yes.
for these guardrails.
Right.
Right. Leah, anything for kiddos? For the little ones? How can they think about covenants?
Well, I like the idea that while we've been talking about all the covenants that God has for us, to look at it as, yes, your parents are going to have different things, different expectations and boundaries for you. But when you cross one of those, it doesn't mean that you're done. And just like God knew all of these covenants were going to be broken, and they were. Your parents know you're going to step out of line, and they still love you. And that's what God gave us Jesus for. He said, this is your second chance. This is everyone's second chance. So no matter how many times you get in trouble, even though your parents are going to hate it, they're still going to be there. And those boundaries are to keep you within the safe space.
That's a great thought to end on. Every parent makes rules in their household, and we don't make those rules thinking, and they'll never break it. Right? Like we think. There's a reason why we make these, because you're going to get on restriction. You're going to get taken away from screens. Something's going to happen, but it doesn't mean that there's not a way back, and not a way back. What a wonderful way to end. Hey, God loves you, and he'll make a way through the most difficult times in our life, and the way that he makes is through Jesus. God bless.